On the morning of August 7th, 1942, as the first waves of United States Marines from the 1st Division pushed through the surf and onto the beaches designated as Beach Red at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, they brought with them an arsenal that Japanese military strategists had never factored into their defensive calculations. Mixed in among the standard-issue Garands and Browning automatic rifles, certain Marines hefted Winchester Model 12 shotguns, pump-action firearms possessing a close-quarters capability that would prove fundamentally incompatible with everything the Imperial Japanese Army had prepared for. The Marines pressed forward through the tropical darkness before dawn, moving inland from those landing zones toward the Lunga River, where the first Japanese defensive works waited. What transpired in those opening clashes would expose a fatal flaw in how Japanese commanders had conceived of combat in the Pacific. The Imperial forces had readied themselves for engagements at rifle distance. They had drilled endlessly for bayonet assaults and sword techniques when fighting got personal. Nobody in the Japanese command structure had accounted for American shotguns that could be fired as rapidly as a Marine could pump the action, a mechanical truth that would demolish Japanese tactical thinking across every island battlefield to come. The Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal numbered 2,200 men, and they were about to learn that the Americans had carried into the Pacific a weapon so brutally effective at close range that the German Empire had attempted to get it prohibited from warfare back in 1918. The Winchester Model 12, equipped with its slam-fire mechanism that allowed multiple shells to be discharged in breathtaking succession, would demonstrate particular lethality in the jungle fighting, cave assaults, and nocturnal combat that defined warfare across the Pacific Islands. The fundamental calculus of battle was shifting. Every single shell held 9 pellets of double-aught buckshot. A Marine proficient in the slam-fire method could unleash 6 shells in less than 3 seconds. In that brief span, 54 projectiles would flood the kill zone, exceeding the number of rounds a Japanese soldier could fire from his bolt-action Arisaka rifle in a full minute. The Winchester Model 12 came to World War II already carrying a reputation forged in the muddy trenches of France during the First World War. American troops had used earlier shotgun variants with such devastating results that the German government, on September 15, 1918, lodged a formal diplomatic complaint transmitted through Swiss intermediaries. This protest, which remains archived in United States State Department records, alleged that shotguns constituted a violation of Article 23E of the Hague Convention because they inflicted unnecessary suffering on combatants. The German government's statement explicitly declared that every prisoner of war discovered in possession of such weapons or their ammunition would forfeit his right to live. Secretary of State Robert Lansing delivered an unambiguous reply. The United States dismissed the German objection outright and issued a warning that any execution of American prisoners for carrying shotguns would trigger immediate reprisals against German prisoners. No American servicemen were put to death for possessing shotguns, and their deployment continued without interruption. The Model 12 had been introduced to the civilian market in 1912 as a hunting firearm, but by 1942 it had undergone substantial military modification. The version designated for military service, known as the M12 trench gun, incorporated a 20-inch cylinder bore barrel instead of the 26 to 30-inch barrels found on civilian versions, featured a perforated metal heat shield protecting the barrel, and included a bayonet mounting lug. Most significantly, it preserved the original design's absence of a trigger disconnector, a mechanical characteristic that enabled slam firing. This wasn't some manufacturing oversight, but a deliberate design choice. Winchester's engineers had intentionally configured the Model 12 so that maintaining pressure on the trigger while operating the pump mechanism would discharge the weapon as fast as the shooter could work the action. Civilian hunters seldom exploited this feature, but military instructors immediately grasped its combat applications. The Imperial Japanese Army had constructed its entire Pacific defense philosophy around several fundamental assumptions that appeared in their training documents. According to United States War Department Technical Manual TME 30-480, titled Handbook on Japanese Military Forces and published in 1944, Japanese military doctrine placed enormous emphasis on two tactical advantages they believed they possessed: proficiency in night operations and superiority in hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese made careful distinctions between what they called kishu, meaning night surprise attack, and kyoshu, translating to night force attack. Their infantry received extensive training in night fighting, learning movement techniques in complete darkness and mastering silent infiltration methods. This assumption, which had been validated through combat experience in China and during the early Pacific victories, held that nighttime fighting nullified American superiority in firepower and technological advantages. Japanese training materials emphasized repeatedly that American forces demonstrated weakness in close combat and relied excessively on mechanical advantages. When battles devolved into bayonet range, Japanese doctrine insisted the superior martial spirit and training of Japanese infantry would carry the day. This wasn't mere propaganda intended to boost morale, but represented a core element of Japanese tactical planning at the operational level. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 appeared to confirm these assumptions perfectly. Japanese troops had overwhelmed British defensive positions through relentless night attacks and vicious close quarters fighting, defeating forces that outnumbered them considerably. Similar victories in the Philippine Islands reinforced the conviction among Japanese planners that Americans, like their British counterparts, could not match Japanese soldiers when combat became intimate and personal. The American landing at Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, represented the first offensive action taken against Japanese-held territory since the war began. Among the equipment distributed to Marine rifle companies were Winchester Model 12 shotguns, allocated primarily to personnel assigned to jungle patrol duties, point defense positions, and security details. Historical records don't provide precise numbers for how many Model 12s were actually present at Guadalcanal, but documentary evidence confirms they were there and saw active use. Equipment manifests for the 1st Marine Division listed riot-type shotguns among the weapons issued to infantry battalions, with corresponding ammunition supplies of buckshot and solid slug rounds. The initial major engagement came during what's called the Battle of the Tenaru, though it actually occurred at the Ilu River on August 21, 1942. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki commanded 916 men of his detachment in a night assault across the sandbar where the river met the ocean, executing precisely the kind of close-range night attack that Japanese tactical doctrine prescribed as optimal. The results proved catastrophic for Japanese forces. Of those 916 attackers, roughly 800 lay dead when dawn broke. Marine machine guns and artillery caused many of those casualties, but the close-range fighting that developed saw shotguns employed to deadly effect. After-action reports from Marine units specifically noted the effectiveness of all weapons systems in repelling the Japanese assault, with particular mention of how valuable increased firepower proved at close quarters. The Model 12's battlefield effectiveness stemmed from specific technical properties. United States Army Ordnance testing established that the military loading of double-aught buckshot contained 9 pellets of .33 caliber lead. At 20 yards distance, these pellets retained sufficient velocity to penetrate 3/4 of an inch of pine board, the standard used to approximate penetration of human tissue. The spread pattern mattered equally. At typical combat ranges between 20 and 30 yards, buckshot spread to roughly 30 inches in diameter, creating a pattern density that made precise aiming largely unnecessary. This characteristic proved invaluable in jungle warfare, where targets frequently appeared as nothing more than fleeting glimpses through thick vegetation. The slam fire capability multiplied these advantages considerably. No precise rate of fire measurements from actual World War II combat exist, but post-war testing established that experienced shooters could discharge 5 to 6 rounds in under 3 seconds using the slam fire technique. This rate of fire surpassed many automatic weapons at close range, with the added benefit of the spreading pellet pattern. Marines developed specialized techniques for employing the Model 12 effectively. Training stressed firing at ground level when defending against crawling infiltrators, taking advantage of how buckshot ricocheted off hard ground. In jungle environments, Marines learned to fire at sounds and movement rather than waiting for clear visual identification of targets, depending on the spread pattern to compensate for imprecise aim. As Marine units accumulated combat experience through 1942 and into 1943, shotgun employment became increasingly sophisticated. The weapons demonstrated particular value in specific tactical scenarios that recurred throughout Pacific combat. During the New Georgia campaign that ran from June through August 1943, shotguns were assigned more frequently to point men leading jungle patrols. The ability to deliver immediate, overwhelming firepower in response to ambush proved invaluable. A Marine walking point could react to movement or suspicious sounds with instant suppressive fire, potentially striking multiple enemies with a single discharge. Night defensive positions incorporated shotguns as primary weapons against infiltration attempts. Japanese tactics frequently involved small groups trying to penetrate Marine perimeters under cover of darkness, relying on stealth and edged weapons. Marines positioned with shotguns could cover sectors with overlapping fields of fire, establishing zones where infiltration became nearly impossible. The weapons also proved effective in what Marines termed jungle lane shooting, the process of clearing paths through dense vegetation where Japanese soldiers might be concealed. The spread pattern would strike multiple obstacles simultaneously, potentially hitting hidden enemies while simultaneously stripping away foliage that provided concealment. The campaign for the Central Pacific Islands introduced an entirely new tactical challenge in the form of Japanese cave fortifications. Beginning with Tarawa in November 1943, and intensifying through subsequent operations, Japanese forces increasingly abandoned traditional defensive lines in favor of fortified caves and bunkers. At Peleliu, beginning September 15, 1944, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had constructed an elaborate cave defense network. The island's coral ridge formations were riddled with natural caves that Japanese engineers had expanded and reinforced. These positions, engineered to withstand naval bombardment and aerial attack, demanded intimate close-range combat to neutralize. The Model 12 adapted well to this new challenge. Marines developed cave-clearing techniques that exploited the shotgun's characteristics. The standard approach involved firing 1 or 2 shells into a cave entrance, allowing the buckshot to ricochet off interior rock walls. The ricocheting pellets created what Marines described as a lead storm inside those confined spaces. The psychological impact often exceeded the physical damage. Japanese soldiers who survived these attacks reported that the sound of ricocheting buckshot in cave interiors was uniquely terrifying, a metallic shrieking that seemed to originate from every direction simultaneously. The invasion of Saipan on June 15, 1944, witnessed continued evolution of shotgun tactics. The Japanese garrison of 31,000 troops under Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito had prepared extensive fortifications, learning from previous American assaults. Marine units had developed what they called shotgun teams, specialized groups assigned to close-range assault missions. These typically consisted of 2 Marines armed with shotguns, 1 bar gunner providing suppressive fire, and 1 or 2 riflemen carrying grenades. The teams operated as specialized assault elements, proving particularly effective against fortified positions. The battle for Saipan also saw expanded use of specialized ammunition types. While double-aught buckshot remained the standard loading, Marines also employed solid slug rounds for longer-range precision shooting and smaller birdshot loads for stripping vegetation to expose hidden positions. On July 7, 1944, Saipan witnessed the largest Japanese banzai charge of the entire war, with approximately 3,000 to 4,000 attackers assaulting American positions. Machine guns and artillery inflicted most casualties, but the close-range fighting that developed when some attackers penetrated American lines saw extensive use of all available weapons, shotguns included. The ability to deliver multiple projectiles without requiring precise aim proved valuable in the confused chaos of night combat. The battle for Iwo Jima, lasting from February 19 through March 26, 1945, presented the ultimate test of cave warfare tactics. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had created the most sophisticated defensive system encountered in the war, 11 miles of tunnels connecting over 1,500 caves, pillboxes, and fortified positions. Kuribayashi had studied American tactics from previous battles and designed his defenses specifically to counter them. Cave entrances were angled to prevent direct fire from penetrating, multiple exits prevented defenders from being trapped, and interior chambers were offset to limit the effectiveness of explosives and flamethrowers. Despite these preparations, Model 12 shotguns remained effective. Marines adapted by developing what they called skip shooting, deliberately bouncing buckshot off tunnel walls to reach around corners. They also increased their use of white phosphorus shells, which created both casualties and smoke that forced Japanese soldiers to evacuate positions. The 21,000 Japanese defenders were gradually eliminated in brutal close-range fighting. Of these, only 216 were taken prisoner, most of them wounded or unconscious when captured. The nature of the fighting at Iwo Jima, with its emphasis on eliminating fortified positions at close range, highlighted the continued relevance of weapons like the Model 12, despite the overall mechanization of modern warfare. The invasion of Okinawa on April 1, 1945, represented the largest amphibious operation conducted in the Pacific War. General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded 100,000 Japanese troops occupying the most extensive defensive network yet constructed. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, serving as Ushijima's operations officer and recognized as one of Japan's most brilliant staff officers, had designed the defense to maximize American casualties at every opportunity. By the time of Okinawa, both sides had absorbed lessons from 3 years of Pacific combat. Japanese forces no longer squandered themselves in futile banzai charges, but fought from carefully prepared positions. American forces had refined their combined arms tactics, with shotguns fulfilling a specific role in the close combat phases of cave and bunker reduction. The 82-day campaign saw the complete evolution of American cave-clearing techniques. Marines and Army troops employed what they termed blowtorch and corkscrew tactics. Flamethrowers provided the blowtorch element, while demolitions and close-range weapons like shotguns served as the corkscrew to penetrate resistant positions. The actual production numbers and distribution of Model 12 shotguns tells a story quite different from popular perception. According to Winchester Company records analysed by historian Herbert G. Howes, only 61,014 Model 12 shotguns were manufactured during World War II. An additional 19,207 were repaired or refurbished by Winchester, leading to confusion about total numbers in some accounts. These weapons were distributed across all service branches, not exclusively to Marine units. The Army Air Forces, for instance, employed Model 12s for air-base defence and aircraft guard duties. The Navy used them for ship security and landing party operations. This relatively limited production run of 61,014 new weapons for a military force numbering 12 million meant that Model 12S were specialized weapons rather than general issue equipment. They were concentrated in units expected to face close combat, Marine rifle companies, Army assault teams, and security detachments. Ammunition supply was more abundant. Military contracts for shotgun shells ran into the millions of rounds, ensuring that units equipped with shotguns had adequate ammunition for both training and combat operations. The standard military load was double-aught buckshot, with slug rounds and smaller shot sizes available for specific purposes. Evaluating the Model 12's actual combat effectiveness requires careful analysis of available evidence. After-action reports from Pacific battles consistently note the value of shotguns in specific situations while acknowledging their limitations. The weapons excelled in several scenarios that were consistently reported across different battles. In jungle ambush response situations, the ability to deliver immediate devastating firepower in response to sudden contact at close range proved invaluable. The spread pattern compensated for the difficulty of acquiring targets in dense vegetation. For night defense, shotguns provided effective deterrence against infiltration attempts. The distinctive sound of a pump action being cycled became a psychological deterrent in itself, while the spread pattern increased the probability of hitting targets in darkness. In cave and bunker clearing operations, the ricochet effect in confined spaces multiplied the weapon's effectiveness substantially. Even when direct hits were not achieved, the psychological impact of buckshot ricocheting in enclosed spaces often forced Japanese soldiers to abandon positions. During final assault phases, when combat closed to ranges under 25 yards, shotguns provided superior firepower compared to bolt-action rifles and even some automatic weapons. However, the weapons had clear limitations that were equally well documented. The effective range of 50 yards or less meant shotgun-armed troops remained vulnerable to rifle fire at longer distances. The ammunition was bulky and heavy compared to rifle rounds, limiting how much could be carried. The weapons required frequent cleaning in the corrosive salt-air environment of the Pacific Islands. Japanese forces attempted various countermeasures to American close combat weapons, including shotguns. These adaptations, documented in captured Japanese materials and post-war interrogations, reveal both the perceived threat and the difficulty of countering it effectively. Some Japanese units experimented with improvised body armor, including thick wooden or bamboo plates designed to stop buckshot penetration. These proved cumbersome and only partially effective, as buckshot could still cause disabling injuries to exposed areas like the head, neck, and limbs. Tactical adaptations included increasing the depth of defensive positions to prevent penetration by assault teams, creating false positions to absorb initial assaults and waste American ammunition, and using obstacles and terrain to maintain engagement distances beyond effective shotgun range. Despite these efforts, Japanese forces never developed fully effective counters to American close combat tactics. The fundamental problem was material in nature. Japan lacked the industrial capacity to match American firepower at any range, forcing continued reliance on tactics that brought them into precisely the close-range fights where weapons like the Model 12 excelled. The German protest of 1918 regarding shotgun use had created a legal precedent that influenced World War II employment. The American rejection of German protests had established that shotguns were legitimate weapons of war under international law. Interestingly, despite the Model 12's effectiveness against Japanese forces, Japan never filed a similar diplomatic protest. This absence may reflect several factors. Japan's own conduct in China had violated numerous international conventions, making legal protests about American weapons problematic at best. The deteriorating diplomatic situation left few channels for such formal protests, and by the time shotguns proved particularly effective in combat, Japan was already losing the war decisively, making protests about specific weapons largely moot. The legal acceptance of shotguns as legitimate weapons contrasted sharply with restrictions on other weapons. Poison gas, banned after World War I, was not employed in the Pacific despite the tactical advantages it might have provided in cave warfare situations. The shotgun, despite its devastating close-range effects, remained within accepted bounds of warfare under international law. The Marine Corps developed specific training programs for shotgun employment based on accumulated combat experience. The Scout Sniper School at Camp Lejeune included shotgun training in its curriculum, though the exact details from World War II have not survived in archival records. Training emphasized several key principles derived from combat experience. Ammunition management was critical because, unlike rifle ammunition, shotgun shells were bulky and heavy. Marines learned to carry shells in elastic loops on belts and bandoliers for rapid access. The standard load was 50 to 60 shells, with resupply being a constant concern. Shooting positions differed from rifle technique because the pump action required different stances. Marines practiced firing from the hip during movement, point shooting without using sights, and maintaining balance while cycling the action rapidly. Target selection training taught shotgunners to engage closest threats first and to sweep across multiple targets rather than focusing on individuals. The spread pattern meant that precise aiming was less important than rapid target engagement. Weapon maintenance took on critical importance because the Pacific environment was particularly hard on firearms. Salt spray, sand, and humidity could quickly render a Model 12 inoperable. Daily maintenance became essential, with emphasis on keeping the action clean and properly lubricated. The American use of shotguns in World War II was relatively unique among major combatant nations. Other nations' approaches to close combat revealed different tactical philosophies shaped by their own military traditions and industrial capabilities. The British military made limited use of shotguns, primarily for prisoner guard duties and specialised operations. British doctrine emphasised the submachine gun, particularly the Sten gun, for close combat situations. The Soviet Union relied heavily on the PPSH-41 submachine gun for close combat, producing over 6 million during the war. The high rate of fire and larger magazine capacity suited Soviet mass assault tactics perfectly. Germany, despite having protested shotgun use in World War I, produced limited numbers of shotguns for specialised use on the Eastern Front. However, the MP-40 submachine gun remained their primary close combat weapon. Japan produced virtually no combat shotguns, maintaining focus on rifles, bayonets, and traditional blade weapons for close combat. This reflected both industrial limitations and cultural preferences embedded in their military tradition. The American adoption of shotguns reflected a pragmatic approach to warfare, using the most effective tool for specific situations, regardless of traditional military conventions or aesthetic preferences. Understanding the Model 12's role requires placing it within the broader context of American combat doctrine in the Pacific theater. The weapon was one element in a combined arms approach that integrated naval gunfire, close air support, artillery and mortar fire, automatic weapons, flamethrowers, and demolitions into a comprehensive system. The typical sequence for reducing a Japanese fortified position by 1945 illustrates this integration clearly. Naval gunfire and aerial bombardment were used to suppress and isolate the position initially. Artillery and mortar fire prevented reinforcement from reaching the position. Machine guns and BAR fire suppressed defensive fire from the position. Assault teams approached using flamethrowers and demolitions to breach defences. Shotguns were employed in the final assault phase to clear the position of remaining defenders. Engineers then sealed or destroyed the position to prevent reoccupation. The shotgun's role was specific but important, providing overwhelming close-range firepower in the critical moments when American and Japanese soldiers met at distances measured in feet rather than yards. The psychological impact of weapons often exceeds their physical effects in combat, and the Model 12 had demonstrable effects on both American and Japanese morale, though these must be assessed carefully given the propaganda and mythology that surrounds weapons. For American forces, the shotgun provided confidence in close combat situations. Marines and soldiers knew they possessed devastating firepower at short range, reducing anxiety about Japanese infiltration and banzai charges. The mechanical simplicity and reliability of the Model 12 also inspired confidence among users. It rarely jammed or malfunctioned and was simple to operate even under extreme stress. The distinctive sound of a pump-action cycling became a morale factor in itself. Veterans reported that the sound reassured friendly troops while potentially deterring enemy action. This psychological effect, while difficult to quantify with precision, appears consistently in veteran accounts and oral histories. After Japan's surrender, the United States military conducted extensive analysis of weapons effectiveness throughout the Pacific War. The Model 12 and other shotguns received mixed assessments in these evaluations. The weapons were credited with exceptional effectiveness in specific situations, particularly cave clearing and night defense operations. The ability to deliver multiple projectiles without requiring precise aiming proved valuable in the confused close-range fighting common throughout the Pacific campaign. However, analysts also noted significant limitations. The short effective range left shotgun-armed troops vulnerable in open terrain where rifle fire dominated. The weapons were less effective against Japanese bunkers constructed with small firing apertures that limited shotgun effectiveness. The logistical burden of supplying specialized ammunition complicated supply operations, particularly in the early island campaigns. Despite these acknowledged limitations, shotguns remained in United States military inventory after the war. The Model 12 served extensively in Korea, where it again proved effective in close combat and night fighting situations. In Vietnam, shotguns were employed by point men on patrols and for tunnel clearing operations, directly applying tactical lessons learned in the Pacific decades earlier. The Model 12's mechanical design influenced subsequent military shotgun development substantially. The pump-action mechanism proved more reliable in harsh combat conditions than semi-automatic designs that were more susceptible to environmental contamination. The slam-fire capability, while eventually eliminated for safety reasons in civilian models, remained valued for military applications, where rapid fire at close range could be decisive. The historical record of Model 12 employment in World War II comes from multiple documentary sources, each with its own limitations and biases. Official after-action reports provide tactical overviews, but rarely detail individual weapons employment in sufficient specificity. These documents reference shotguns in general terms, but seldom describe actual combat use in detail. Many records were lost or destroyed during the war itself or in the chaotic immediate post-war period. Technical manuals describe the weapon's operation and basic employment principles, but don't capture specific combat experiences or tactical innovations developed by users. Veteran accounts preserved in post-war memoirs and oral histories provide valuable anecdotal evidence, but must be evaluated carefully for accuracy and how representative they are of broader experience. Japanese records, including captured documents and post-war interrogations, provide the enemy perspective, but are limited by translation issues and the fact that many Japanese military records were deliberately destroyed at war's end. Photographic evidence from combat zones occasionally shows Marines carrying shotguns, but cannot document their effectiveness or how they were actually employed in specific engagements. This fragmentary and incomplete evidence base requires careful analysis to separate documented historical fact from mythology, assumption, and post-war embellishment. The Model 12's employment highlighted the vast industrial and technological gap that existed between the United States and Japan by the middle years of the war. American forces could afford to issue specialized weapons for specific tactical situations, a luxury that reflected enormous industrial capacity. The ability to produce 61,014 shotguns for relatively limited military application while simultaneously producing millions of rifles, hundreds of thousands of machine guns, and tens of thousands of artillery pieces demonstrated overwhelming material superiority that Japan simply could not match. Japan, conversely, struggled increasingly to provide even basic rifles and ammunition to its forces as the war progressed. The Japanese Type 99 rifle, while excellent in fundamental design, suffered from declining manufacturing quality as Japan's industrial capacity collapsed under sustained American attack. By 1945, Japanese forces were issuing bamboo spears alongside rifles to home defense units, highlighting the complete industrial collapse occurring within Japan. This disparity extended to ammunition supply in ways that profoundly affected combat effectiveness. American forces could expend shotgun shells freely in both training and combat operations. Standard operating procedure called for using fresh ammunition and discarding any shells that showed even minor corrosion or damage. Japanese forces, meanwhile, counted every rifle cartridge carefully and often depended on captured American ammunition to sustain operations. The development of shotgun tactics in the Pacific demonstrates American military adaptability and organizational learning in combat. Unlike more rigid military hierarchies that impose tactics from the top down through formal doctrine, American forces encouraged innovation at the small unit level. Marines who discovered effective techniques shared them informally through their units. Successful methods spread organically through word of mouth and practical demonstration. Officers then incorporated proven techniques into formal training programs and doctrinal publications. This bottom-up innovation process allowed rapid tactical adaptation to changing battlefield conditions and new challenges. The skip shooting technique for cave clearing, for example, appears to have developed independently in multiple units facing similar tactical problems. Marines discovered through experimentation that buckshot would ricochet predictably off rock walls, allowing them to effectively shoot around corners and into offset chambers. This technique, born of battlefield necessity and individual experimentation, became standard operating procedure through informal diffusion rather than formal doctrinal pronouncement. Similarly, the use of mixed ammunition loads, alternating buckshot and slug rounds in the magazine, developed from accumulated combat experience rather than pre-war doctrine or formal instruction. Marines learned through trial and error that this combination provided tactical flexibility in engaging varied targets without needing to change weapons or fumble with different ammunition types under fire. While tactical weapons like the Model 12 played important supporting roles, the Pacific War's ultimate outcome was determined by much larger strategic factors beyond small arms effectiveness. American submarine warfare systematically strangled Japanese maritime logistics, isolating garrisons and preventing reinforcement or resupply. Strategic bombing progressively destroyed Japanese industrial capacity, preventing replacement of lost equipment and ammunition. Naval supremacy following decisive carrier battles isolated Japanese island garrisons from mutual support. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended Japanese resistance without requiring the planned invasion of the home islands. Within this larger strategic framework, weapons like the Model 12 contributed to tactical successes that supported operational and strategic objectives. Efficient reduction of Japanese fortified positions conserved American manpower, a critical strategic consideration given the need to maintain forces for the planned invasion of Japan. Rapid clearance of positions maintained offensive momentum in campaigns, allowing faster advance to strategic objectives like airfields and port facilities. The shotgun's effectiveness in cave clearing, for instance, reduced American casualties in the grinding attrition battles of 1944 and 1945. Each fortified position cleared quickly and efficiently meant fewer American casualties and faster operational tempo advancing towards strategic objectives. The Model 12's employment in the Pacific offers broader lessons about military innovation and adaptation that extend beyond the specific weapon system. One lesson concerns applying existing technology in new applications. The Model 12 was already a 30-year-old design when World War II began. Innovation came not from developing new technology, but from applying existing, mature technology to new tactical problems in creative ways. Another lesson concerns user-driven innovation emerging from combat experience. The most effective tactics developed from bottom-up experimentation by combat users rather than top-down doctrine development by staff officers removed from actual fighting. This highlights the value of organizational cultures that encourage and reward tactical innovation at the lowest levels. The balance between specialized and general-purpose capabilities represents another enduring lesson. The Model 12 excelled in specific situations but had clear limitations that made it unsuitable as a primary infantry weapon. Military forces must constantly balance specialized capabilities optimized for specific scenarios against general-purpose requirements needed across diverse situations. The relationship between training and technology emerges as another critical lesson. The weapon's combat effectiveness depended heavily on proper training in employment techniques and maintenance procedures. Technology alone, without supporting doctrine, training, and logistical support, provides limited operational advantage. Finally, the importance of a robust industrial base becomes clear from this history. The ability to produce and supply specialized weapons and their ammunition depends fundamentally on substantial industrial capacity and efficient logistics systems. Japan's inability to match American production in any category doomed their strategic position regardless of tactical proficiency or warrior spirit. The Winchester Model 12 served American forces from Guadalcanal through Okinawa and beyond, through steaming jungles and into fortified caves, adapting to every tactical challenge the Pacific War presented. The distinctive mechanical sound of a pump action being cycled became an audible marker of American tactical innovation and adaptability. Marines and soldiers armed with Model 12s demonstrated how industrial democracy could develop and deploy specialized weapons optimized for specific tactical challenges as they emerged. The weapon that Germany had formerly protested as inhumane and prohibited under international law proved to be simply another practical tool in the comprehensive American arsenal. The Model 12's legacy extends well beyond World War II itself. The tactics developed through hard experience in the Pacific Islands influenced American military doctrine through subsequent conflicts in Korea and Vietnam and into contemporary operations. The emphasis on overwhelming close combat firepower, deployment of specialized weapons for specific tactical situations, and encouragement of user-driven tactical innovation all remain relevant to modern military operations. Japanese infantry formations never anticipated that Winchester Model 12 trench guns would slam fire through their carefully prepared defenses because such weapons violated their fundamental assumptions about how warfare would unfold. The Model 12 delivered a straightforward message to Japanese defenders across the Pacific. American forces would apply overwhelming firepower at every range, exploit every available technology regardless of traditional military conventions, and adapt continuously through organizational learning and tactical innovation. In the brutal arithmetic of Pacific combat, where casualties were counted in increments and every fortified position had to be taken at terrible cost, the Model 12 added its distinctive weight to the scales tilting toward American victory. The transformation was accomplished not through the Model 12 alone, which remained a specialized weapon of limited distribution, but through what it represented about American military culture. That culture embraced any effective weapon without regard to tradition, developed innovative tactics through bottom-up experimentation, and applied massive industrial production capacity to solve tactical problems systematically. The Japanese infantry soldiers who faced these weapons in combat discovered that their opponents had mastered not merely the traditional art of war, but the modern science of systematically applying firepower to destroy any defense, overcome any obstacle, and achieve victory through material superiority combined with relentless tactical innovation and organizational adaptation. The Winchester Model 12 shotgun, a civilian hunting weapon adapted for military service, became an emblem of this approach, delivering devastating close-range firepower when American and Japanese soldiers met in the intimate brutality of jungle clearings and cave interiors where the war's outcome was ultimately decided one position at a time.